Hello, everyone. I am Allie Grovey with Ignite Management. I am here with my three colleagues, consultant Katerina Moreno, consultant Jordan Orr, and consultant/president/founder, Mr. Mike Watson. We are chatting today about work-life harmony. This is a term that has been around Ignite since the beginning of Ignite, but it's been coming up in conversation both internally and with clients more and more lately. So we thought it would be a good opportunity to dig into it with each other and with everyone who's listening. To start us off, Mike, how did this term first make its way into the Ignite vocabulary?
When we started this iteration of Ignite 3 years ago and assembled this team that's on this call together, we were talking about work-life balance. That was the vernacular of the day, is the pursuit of work-life balance. And a great influencer in my life is my niece, Amanda Watson, Dr. Amanda Watson, who's a sociology professor at Simon Fraser University. She was on CBC radio, and I was listening to the broadcast, and she was being interviewed on the constructs of gender balance, gender bias, and the challenges in particular for working mothers. One of the directions she went on that interview was this question of work-life balance. And she laughed and said, there's no such thing. There's simply no such thing as work-life balance. You can't separate one from the other and say that they're not linked. And so she challenged the notion of work-life balance and introduced this concept, introduced it to me, of work-life harmony. And that's finding this way to create a positive intersection of your home life and your work life. I'm sure it came up before then, Allie. That's the first word of it.
Yeah, so we did. So this has been coming up more and more. And I know one reason it's been coming up is Amanda has just published a book, The Juggling Mother, that gets into that more. And so that has in part spurred some further conversations for us. So we did a bit of digging into what is the actual origin of this concept, and found a few things. So the furthest back academic article that I came across is from 2011 from Professor Heather McMillan at Southeast Missouri State University, where she presents it as a new concept or framework for thinking about the work-life interaction called work-life harmony. But she recognizes in it as well, this is not the first time the term has ever been used. There have been other people that have kind of presented it as a different way of looking at the work-life interaction. And it's, I've heard it in, sort of popular culture a little bit as well. Some big names, Satya Nadella at Microsoft, Jeff Bezos have mentioned it, but it doesn't seem to have really stuck or taken off in a big way. And partly this has come up, I know for you, Jordan, with some conversations with clients, it's the first time a lot of people have heard of this term.
Yeah, and it's we can get into it, but there's obviously something happening within society in a broader context, as well as the business environment that's spurring the need for this conversation now more than ever. And that's one of the things that today I'm really excited to dive into. Yeah,
so we will definitely dive into that. Before we, for the sake of ourselves as well as our listeners, before we dive into this like why now question, which is super important, what is it? How is it different than work-life balance? Like, why do we need this different term?
So actually, I'm going to jump in, and I wrote this answer down to that question before we got on this call, and ironically, it lines up almost exactly with what Mike was talking about. What it means to me is it's the ability or the opportunity to feel fulfilled in all aspects of your life, recognizing that the pieces of your life are interconnected, not segmented. So when Mike was talking about his niece, and how she was saying that work-life balance doesn't exist because it's not one piece here and another piece over here. They all exist synergistically, and the impacts of one segment of your life are going to have connections to another segment of your life.
Okay, so this is really cool because that connects really well with with some of this research that I looked at. And the research from Macmillan was around describing it as the reduction of work-life conflict, which is when your roles are in conflict with one another, and the increase or enhancement of work-life enrichment, whereas the two roles enrich one another, which is exactly what you were just talking about, Jordan. So really, really cool to hear it put that way. Katerina, how does this play out for you? How does this work in your life?
So I can see it, maybe just adding a little bit to the definition or how I conceptualize it. It helps me to think of maybe Venn diagrams, it's very hard to be separating just your work life from your personal life, from maybe your volunteering or you're giving back to giving back to community and other aspects of your life. How do they intersect, and how can you make sure that they are as much intersecting in a way that makes sense for you? And so I think for me that has primarily I think I can see it about my own life, where I have tried to align my interests, my values, and what I want my work to achieve in the world to smush these circles together and to increase the Venn sphere as much as possible. And so I think that that is one way of how I conceptualize it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, what stands out to me from that, or one thing that stands out, is this what works for you. So what is the individually pleasing or congruent arrangement of these things? And that can be extremely different for other people. And it doesn't necessarily mean you must work less or that you must spend equal amounts of time on these things. And that's very different for different people. Mike, you're smiling.
Well, because what an interesting construct. We want to create a model, and a model which enhances work-life harmony, and really how arrogant we could be should we choose to go down that path, because it's so personalized, it's so individualized, and it's something that I think we want to be really conscious of, is work-life harmony isn't one size fits all. And that's what we're just hearing from Katerina. It's aligning to her purpose and what's important to her in life, and then how those constructs intersect. And I love the way she's described it as a Venn diagram. It's a massive zone of intersection, a zone in union, and unique to each individual. And I think that's something that, as we tackle it, both for our clients and for ourselves, recognize that that's a critical component.
Mm-hmm. And yeah, Jordan, go ahead. Go.
I wanted to highlight one of the things that Katerina said, because I think she used a powerful word that I don't want to get overlooked, which is values. Personally, we all have our set of values, and then when you bring those forward to a work environment, if the conditions created by your work environment are in conflict with your personal values, attaining that work-life harmony is a near impossible feat. And so when we talk about leadership, and the role of leaders, and I think this is where this conversation is going to evolve to, but the role of leaders really is to create an environment where personal values can become aligned with professional values.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's so much here. So yes, it's the individual pursuit of work-life harmony, and what does that mean to individuals? And then what is the leader finding that for themselves, but also creating the conditions to enable the people that they lead to find it. And that gets into the organizational and leadership, imperatives around it. But I also don't want to lose an important word that Mike brought up, and I think the context was maybe different than where I'm going with it, but the word was arrogance. And immediately what popped in my head was something Katerina brought up earlier before we started recording this, is around privilege, and who is in such a privileged position to be able to seek and pursue work-life harmony. Katerina, more thoughts on that enormous subject?
Yeah, I mean, there is always the idea of when we have these conversations around striving for self-actualization and striving to achieve your goals and whatnot in life, either for yourself or maybe for your company. There's in the context of COVID, in the context of Black Lives Matter, in the context of decolonization, I think we have to be really, really attuned to, are we just talking about a privileged subset of people who can maybe concentrate on that and that pursuit, ignoring the rest of the system that is all around us. So I think I do actually think that the concept of work-life harmony does lend itself to not doing that, or to keeping in mind that, of course, every leader, every staff person, every member of a team is embedded in the larger system. And so life conceptualized not just as Katarina and my goals and my values, what I want to achieve, but also maybe my community, my family, my team. I think it can be applied in a less individualistic way and more systemic way. And so embedding it into the larger conversations, I think is a lot. I feel more comfortable with the term work-life harmony and the striving towards that versus work-life balance, which I think presupposes that you have these two bubbles and you just have to manage the sizes. But work-life harmony has different implications, and I think a lot more power to conceptualize things differently and to be more active in creating a different way of working and living.
I think about there's this like a hierarchy of needs pyramid. I think when I first saw it, it was about employee engagement, but it's about, the bottom of the pyramid is that, do I have the fundamental things I need? Do I have enough? Am I making enough money to pay my bills? And if that's where your employee is, you're not up here at the top of the pyramid helping them to achieve self-actualization. So it's, where are the individuals, and as leaders and organizations, like, how are we helping move people up the pyramid? I think is part of it, and recognizing that, if basic needs are not being met, then people aren't in a position of privilege to be able to kind of seek those higher levels of attainment. Mike, what's going through your head?
That it's a complex topic.
Yeah.
It's a really complex topic. And we often talk about the work we do at Ignite. It's where psychology and business and sociology intersect. And they're all interrelated. And so then there's individual awareness of this, and what impact are we having on society as a whole? That's an important thing. What is our corporate impact on society as a whole? And then with the people we serve specifically as a company, what is our role? And we talk about enhancing the well-being of employees, achieving business success, and enhancing the well-being of employees. So that steers us down the path of that ecosystem, which is the workplace ecosystem. And I think that's an important place for us to start. The challenge, of course, is that can't be done in isolation or ignoring the broader social context. And whether it's Black Lives Matter or white privilege or these very critical, very real social issues that are there that we have to be conscious of. And with that consciousness, what impact can we have for the people that we serve directly?
So we've brushed a little bit against the why now question. Like, why is this coming up more and more? At least for us at Ignite, it's been coming up more internally and in conversations with external parties. So there's a societal context and things that are happening, and COVID obviously is having a big impact on people and their ability to juggle or balance or harmonize, or whatever way you want to look at it. Is that why it's coming up more? Like, what do you think why are we hearing more about this or talking more about it right now?
I can take that one. I think we are circling around the answers to that question right now. I think COVID has played a large role in this conversation coming up now, especially given the push to work from home, the push from employees to work from home, not so much on the employer side, but on the employee side. To Katarina's point, I think what's happened over the last 5 or 6 months has really put into a test people's personal values against corporate values. And we're really seeing these issues being brought to the front or the forefront because the questions are being asked, do these corporate values really allow me to live out my personal values? And it's now becoming a question of, are these just words on a page that my company says we should live by, or are these something that we will actually all live by as leaders? And then you conflate that with these broader social issues as well, and it's almost the perfect storm, but it's also the right time to have this conversation.
Yeah, and that reminds me of the conversation that Mike and I had last week about like whose pursuit is this? Is this an expectation that people should get super jazzed about pursuing the company's purpose, or is it about aligning the individual purpose and whatever work-life integration means to them and aligning that with the company purpose? And with COVID, in very dire times, this attempt to rally the troops around the good of the company when they have all this other stuff going on, you're going to start to really feel that disconnect or the problem with assuming people should get behind the corporate pursuit.
Ali, I want to jump on that one. We had brunch this weekend with a clinical counselor, and we were talking about, and she does a lot of work with executives as well. And she was talking about the stresses that are coming to her every day. And she talked about political crisis with what we see happening in the political environment globally, health crisis, not health problem, but health crisis, economic crisis, social crisis, and each individual is wearing this in some way, shape, or form. So as individuals, the stress level, stress introduced as the silent killer, everybody's got this. And then we say, oh yeah, and we want you to be a great employee. Well, we're wrestling with all of these personal matters. And it really, to Jordan's point, the aligning values on an individual level when individuals are at heightened levels of anxiety. And that's really bad for the people that have the economic capability to throw money at the problem. Imagine what it's like for those that don't, the marginalized. So these stresses that are in our community today are massive. So it is exactly the right thing to be talking about, is that work-life harmony in the broad context.
Katerina, is this exacerbated, do you think, in the nonprofit and association space where the nature of the work that they do is about serving others? Is this pressure exacerbated, do you think, for leaders or people working in those spaces versus private enterprise?
I would say that, yes, I think the association and the nonprofit sphere have definitely been suffering. I don't want to say more or less than maybe the for-profit sphere. Just, I think sometimes the buffer of resilience is just a little bit thinner because people are already much more in precarious roles. They are already less paid less than in comparable roles, and just in general, the sectors can be quite undersourced. And so,
stop. The buffer of resilience.
I wrote that down.
Or is that something that's come from research? Because that's a little bit of magic. Tell us more about that one.
Yeah, just thinking about. So, for example, bringing it back to the example what you were mentioning earlier about Dr. Amanda Watson. Thinking about you're now a mother, you have 2 kids, you have a full-time academic career, and maybe you also do some outside work and whatnot. The buffer that you have for that carefully aligned system of daycare, work, meetings, family time, and so forth to get thrown out of balance because something didn't work. If your buffer of time is maybe only 15 minutes, that is really problematic. So it can either be time, so buffer in the sense of being able to absorb the external shocks, or it can be money, people having savings, people having the skills to search for other jobs and whatnot. And of course, that is at the individual level, but then at an organizational level, it's, for example, for nonprofits, it's, do you have the internal resilience to the capacities of doing ad hoc scenario planning and quickly pivoting and whatnot? Do you have institutional money saved for when when the donations go down, etc. So it's that buffer that can be made up of different things. But I was just going to say something else but I think I've lost my train of thought. Anyway, that was the buffer resilience.
I want to jump on the buffer resilience. I love that term. I absolutely love it. And some of the work we've done with Dan Stone, another counselor, and he talks about helping organizations and individuals manage the stresses. We can't change them. The society we live in is the society we live in with all of these challenges. But how can we help manage that? And that gets into what do we do with this in terms of work-life harmony? What's the role of the company? This is a big aha for me in this call, is what is our role? It is to enhance the resilience, enhance the ability of individuals to manage the stresses of the moment, be that through the policies we put in place in the workplace, be it through the encouragement of individuals to attend to family needs, recognizing the buffers on that side are less than they once were. But I love the term, and I think it's very instructive on the role of leaders and managing in these times.
Yeah.
I actually, just to jump on that one, I remember my train of thought, which was also maybe Mike answering your question. Well, what is, for example, our role? What role can we as Ignite play in advancing that conversation? Is I think we can act as catalysts. We can give a space for these conversations to be happening. We can give the kind of intellectual and emotional safer space to be exploring some of these things, because to I think what Jordan was saying, now with COVID and all the other stresses from climate change to BLM and whatnot, I think it is creating, apart from a lot of hardship, acknowledging that, but also this space of this zone of change where many existing restrictions and expectations and rules are not applying right now. And so it's a space for innovation. It's a space for possibility. It's a space for questioning so many assumptions that maybe we took for granted before. And now we can help make use of that space and just explore and see what else is possible, what can be changed. So I think that can be a role that we play with leaders.
So I know if our marketing team, Julie and Brittany, were here, they'd be like, wrap it up. That's long enough for social media, but I'm not going to, because there's a wrench I want to throw in this, and it's quite related to COVID and some things Katerina was talking about. I was listening to a podcast recently on the approach to the work-life mix, and there's a bunch of study done. I think it was actually by Google, but the person speaking about it was a professor at the Wharton School. And the study was categorize people as segmentors or integrators. Segmentors being people that really, like at one end of the spectrum, really like to keep their work and their professional life separate. They don't want pictures of their family on their desk. They don't want to use the corporate daycare. They want to keep it separate, and they kind of expect other people to do the same. And then at the far end, there's integrators, people who wanted all this great big messy mix all mixed together. And I was thinking about this as an analogy potentially, or something similar, of work-life balance versus work-life harmony. What was interesting and where the wrench is that they found that that about 70% of people were integrators, but half of those people wanted to be segmentors. So it was more about aligning who you are. And the problem is, if you want to be, for example, a segmentor, the problem is that you're overly integrated and you don't want to be. So where that conflict comes in, and that's where it goes back to that, what works for you as an individual. And they found that the people who had a greater sense of well-being were actually the segmentors, the people who kept work and life separate. Thoughts on how that works into the mix?
I think it's Jordan's turn.
This is a really interesting thought, and this has been a big light bulb moment for me in this conversation. I think leading up to this conversation, my mind was more around the business environment in general, and then the role that we play in our conversations with business leaders. And the light bulb for me is translating that conversation to the individual level, right? and it's recognizing the individual's desire. And I keep coming back to this constructive values, and you talk about segmentors versus integrators, and I really like that. But I think what's at the core of that is that values piece, right? And if we try to take an approach where we say everybody needs to go from here to here, we're going to run up against a brick wall, as opposed to saying, let's create the conditions so that everybody, leaders all the way, and then all the way down through the organization to the ground level employees, then have the capability to act on whatever they feel individually is best for them, and not having to pigeonhole them into any criteria or environment. So that's been a big light bulb moment for me so far.
Yeah, for sure. I think that's a good place to end it. So whether you're more a segmenter or an integrator, whether you think of it as work-life harmony or work-life balance, it's about finding how critical it is for leaders to find an approach that works for them and that's aligned with their values and their purpose, and then getting into the organizational context of how do we create an environment that helps others do the same. So thank you all, my teammates, for joining me. And thanks everyone for listening. So to people who are listening, if you like this video, please do share it. And if you want to talk about work-life harmony or leadership or strategy, strategic planning, please reach out to us. Thank you all. Bye-bye.